Today, we're talking about a topic that makes many people uncomfortable, not because it's inappropriate, but because it quietly challenges what most men think they understand about attraction. The topic is hidden signs a woman secretly craves you, and more specifically, how these signs show up beneath the surface through behavior, emotional responses, and psychological patterns. This isn't about flashy flirting or obvious signals. It's about what shows up when someone is trying not to show how deeply they feel. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is a space where we talk about human behavior honestly, calmly, and without exaggeration. My perspective today comes from years of working as a therapist, sitting across from people who were struggling to understand why they felt so strongly for someone they claimed they weren't that interested in. For confidentiality reasons, I'll never name anyone or give identifying details, but the patterns repeat far more often than most people realize. Here's where this becomes controversial. Many men are taught that if a woman wants you, she'll make it obvious. She'll chase, compliment, or clearly pursue. In practice, I've seen the opposite. Some of the strongest desire shows up as restraint, emotional tension, and subtle behavioral shifts. Not because she's playing games, but because desire can feel risky, especially when it threatens her sense of control, identity, or emotional safety. In therapy sessions, I've watched people describe someone with intense detail while insisting they don't care that much. Their tone changes. Their body language tightens. Their focus sharpens. Desire doesn't always announce itself loudly. Often it hides behind logic, distance, or even indifference. What makes this difficult is that these signs are easy to miss if you're only looking for surface-level cues. They require emotional awareness, patience, and the ability to observe patterns over time. That's what we're going to unpack in this video. This isn't about manipulation, pressure, or entitlement. It's about understanding human psychology, recognizing emotional signals, and learning how attraction often operates quietly, especially when someone is trying to keep it under control. Stay with me. The signs are subtle, but once you understand them, you won't unsee them. 1. She becomes emotionally alert around you. One of the earliest signs I've learned to pay attention to, both in therapy rooms and in everyday human behavior, is emotional alertness. This is not excitement in the dramatic sense. It's not nervous laughter or exaggerated enthusiasm. Emotional alertness is quieter, and that's why it's so often overlooked. When a woman secretly craves someone, her emotional system becomes more attentive in his presence, even if she's trying to appear calm or neutral. I've listened to people describe this state many times without realizing what they were revealing. They'll say things like, "I don't know why, but when he's around I feel more aware," or "I find myself choosing my words more carefully." That heightened awareness is not accidental. It's the mind signaling that someone matters. When attraction is hidden, the body doesn't relax, it sharpens. You'll notice this in small ways. She may listen more closely than she does with others, even during casual conversations. Her responses become more thoughtful. She reacts quickly to emotional shifts in the room when you're present. This isn't about trying to impress you. In fact, it's often the opposite. It's about maintaining composure while feeling internally engaged. From a psychological perspective, desire activates the same systems responsible for emotional monitoring. When someone is important to us, we unconsciously scan for approval, disapproval, connection, and distance. That's why emotional alertness shows up before anything romantic ever becomes obvious. It's a protective response as much as it is an attraction-based one. What makes this sign confusing for many men is that emotional alertness can look like seriousness or restraint. She might seem more controlled, less playful, or even slightly distant, but underneath that control is attention. And attention is one of the clearest indicators of attraction that isn't being openly expressed. In therapeutic settings, I've seen people insist they felt nothing special for someone, yet they could recount entire conversations word for word. They remembered tone, pauses, facial expressions. The mind doesn't do that with people it doesn't care about. Emotional alertness is memory forming in real time. If you're paying attention, you'll notice that when you enter the room, something subtly shifts, not in volume, but in focus. She's more present, more aware, more responsive to emotional cues. That's not coincidence. That's desire being managed, not absent. This is where patience matters. Emotional alertness isn't a green light to push forward. It's a signal to slow down, observe, and remain grounded. Attraction that's hidden tends to reveal itself first through attention, not action. And once you understand that, you stop mistaking restraint for disinterest. 2. Her self-control increases instead of disappearing. One of the most misunderstood dynamics in attraction is the assumption that desire makes people lose control. In reality, when attraction feels meaningful or risky, self-control often increases. This is something I've seen repeatedly in therapeutic conversations, especially when someone is trying to understand why they act more guarded around one particular person. When a woman secretly craves you, she may become more measured, not less. Her words are chosen carefully. Her reactions are tempered. She resists emotional impulses she might freely express with others. To many men, this reads as disinterest or emotional coldness, but psychologically, it's often the opposite. Strong attraction can trigger a desire to maintain stability, dignity, and emotional safety. From a behavioral standpoint, self-control rises when someone perceives emotional stakes. If nothing matters, there's nothing to protect. But when something matters deeply, the mind becomes strategic. She may slow conversations down, avoid revealing too much, or maintain a composed exterior. This isn't manipulation, it's regulation. In therapy, people often describe this as feeling too aware of themselves. They'll say they don't want to say the wrong thing, don't want to appear vulnerable, or don't want to create a situation they can't emotionally manage. That tension between desire and restraint is a powerful indicator of attraction that isn't being expressed openly. Men are often taught to look for emotional availability as the primary signal of interest. While that can be true, it's incomplete. Emotional availability without boundaries can indicate comfort, not attraction. Heightened self-control, on the other hand, often shows up when someone feels pulled toward another person, but isn't ready to let that pull show. This is where education matters. If you misinterpret self-control as rejection, you may pull away prematurely or attempt to force clarity. Both actions can disrupt a dynamic that's still forming internally. Attraction needs space to breathe. Pressure collapses it. You may notice that she holds eye contact a moment longer, but then looks away. Or she engages deeply in conversation, but avoids emotionally loaded topics. These are not mixed signals. They are regulated signals. They suggest awareness, not absence. Understanding this changes how you respond. Instead of escalating or withdrawing, you stay consistent. You remain calm, grounded, and emotionally steady. That steadiness is what allows self-control to slowly relax over time. Hidden attraction often doesn't look like enthusiasm. It looks like discipline. And discipline only shows up when something matters enough to be handled carefully. 3. She tracks you without making it obvious. One of the most revealing patterns I've observed over the years is how attention quietly follows desire. When a woman is secretly drawn to someone, her awareness of him doesn't turn off when he leaves the room. It continues, subtly, almost invisibly. This isn't about surveillance or obsession, it's about psychological relevance. The mind naturally keeps track of what feels important. In therapeutic conversations, people often say things like, "I don't know why I notice when he hasn't been around," or "I didn't mean to remember that detail, it just stuck." That's not coincidence. When attraction is present, the brain begins to monitor patterns, where you are, how you show up, when your energy changes. It does this quietly without announcing itself. What makes this sign engaging is how invisible it usually is to the person experiencing it. She isn't consciously thinking, "I need to pay attention to him." Instead, she just notices. She notices when you're quieter than usual. She notices when your routine shifts. She notices your absence more than your presence, and she may never admit this, even to herself. This kind of tracking often shows up indirectly. She may ask questions that seem casual but reveal awareness. She might reference something you mentioned in passing weeks ago. She might comment on changes in your mood or behavior that others overlook. These moments feel small, but psychologically, they're significant. Desire sharpens perception. When someone matters, the mind builds a quiet map of them. Not to control, but to understand. This is especially true when attraction is unspoken. Without open communication, attention becomes the bridge. Many men miss this sign because they're looking for direct pursuit. They expect initiative to be obvious, but subtle tracking is a form of emotional investment. Time, attention, and memory are finite resources. We don't allocate them to people who don't register emotionally. I've seen people insist they were indifferent while being able to recount precise emotional shifts in another person. They knew when he was stressed, distracted, or distant. That level of attunement doesn't come from neutrality. It comes from care. The key is how you respond. If you notice this pattern, the worst move is to test it or call it out. That creates self-consciousness and pulls her back into control mode. Instead, you stay present. You stay consistent. You allow the dynamic to unfold naturally. Attraction that's hidden often reveals itself through awareness, not words. She's paying attention even when she pretends she isn't. And once you recognize that, you begin to understand how desire often speaks in quiet, sustained focus rather than obvious action. 4. Your presence changes her mood, not her words. One of the most complex dynamics I've encountered as a therapist appears when someone is already in a relationship, yet finds their emotional state shifting around one specific person. This is where attraction becomes especially quiet, controlled, and often confusing. When a woman is committed elsewhere, hidden desire rarely shows up through words. It shows up through mood. In sessions, I've heard people say things like, "I don't flirt with him," or "I would never cross a line." And I believe them. But then they describe feeling lighter when he's around, more focused, more energized, or in some cases, more irritated and restless without understanding why. Mood doesn't lie as easily as language does. When attraction is suppressed by commitment, the mind works overtime to maintain moral and emotional boundaries. Words stay appropriate, behavior stays respectful, but the nervous system still responds. Her emotional state shifts in response to your presence, even if her communication never changes. You may notice that when you enter a room, her energy subtly lifts or tightens. She becomes more animated, more serious, or more emotionally engaged, not because she wants to act on anything, but because emotions are automatic. They respond before logic has time to intervene. What's important to understand is that this isn't about intention. Attraction doesn't always mean desire for action. Often, it's simply resonance. Two emotional systems responding to each other. Especially when someone is in a relationship, that resonance can feel unsettling, which is why it often gets buried under normal conversation. In therapy, people often struggle most with this internal contradiction. They'll say, "I love my partner, but I feel different when this person is around." That difference is rarely verbalized outwardly. Instead, it leaks through mood. Tone softens, attention deepens. Emotional reactions become more pronounced. Men often miss this sign because they're listening for interest instead of observing emotional shifts. But mood is data. If her emotional state consistently changes around you, that's meaningful. Neutral people don't affect us emotionally in consistent ways. The key here is restraint. When attraction exists within the context of a relationship, it's not something to push or exploit. In fact, pressure often triggers guilt, withdrawal, and emotional shutdown. Calm presence matters more than pursuit. Hidden attraction in this context is less about desire and more about emotional impact. You affect her inner state, even when she refuses to let it affect her choices. And psychologically, that's one of the strongest indicators that someone holds more significance than they're willing to admit. 5. She tests emotional safety before desire. When a woman is already in a relationship, any emerging attraction outside of it is rarely experienced as excitement first. More often, it's experienced as concern. Concern about boundaries, about consequences, about what it might say about her values. In those situations, desire doesn't move forward unless emotional safety is quietly assessed. This is a pattern I've seen consistently in therapeutic work, and it's one many men misunderstand. When attraction feels complicated, the mind shifts into evaluation mode. Instead of asking, "Do I like him?" the deeper question becomes, "Is he safe for me emotionally?" Not safe in a physical sense, but safe in terms of pressure, expectation, and emotional intrusion. If she feels drawn to you while committed elsewhere, she will unconsciously test whether you add calm or create tension. These tests are subtle. She may share something personal but emotionally contained, then observe your response. Not to seek reassurance, but to gauge how you handle vulnerability. She may express uncertainty, stress, or frustration, and watch whether you try to fix it, exploit it, or simply hold space. Emotional safety is revealed in how someone responds when nothing is being asked of them. In therapy, people often describe feeling unexpectedly relieved around a particular person. Not excited, not overwhelmed, just steadier. That sense of emotional grounding is powerful, especially when someone is trying to suppress attraction. If being around you feels regulating rather than destabilizing, desire is allowed to exist quietly without panic. What men often miss is that pushing for clarity, validation, or emotional escalation during this phase can backfire. It introduces pressure where she is actively trying to maintain balance. Emotional safety is built through consistency, restraint, and respect for boundaries, not through urgency. You might notice that she seeks you out during emotionally neutral moments rather than intense ones, or that she opens up slightly, then pulls back to observe the emotional aftermath. These are not games. They are internal checkpoints. Her nervous system is asking whether closeness with you feels manageable. When someone is in a relationship, desire that bypasses emotional safety feels dangerous, not exciting. That's why she will often delay emotional exposure, monitor her reactions, and remain internally cautious even while feeling drawn. The most telling sign is this: she feels calmer after interacting with you, not more conflicted. That calm doesn't eliminate attraction. It allows it to exist without triggering guilt or fear. Hidden attraction in this context isn't about fantasy or impulse. It's about emotional regulation. And when someone quietly tests safety before desire, it's because the desire already exists, and they're trying to understand what to do with it without losing themselves in the process. 6. She mirrors you in subtle unconscious ways. One of the most reliable indicators of hidden attraction is something people almost never do on purpose: mirroring. I don't mean obvious imitation or forced agreement. I'm talking about subtle alignment that happens beneath awareness, the kind that shows up only when emotional connection is quietly forming. In therapy, I've watched people describe interactions without realizing what they were revealing. They'll say things like, "I don't know why, but I talk slower around him," or "I notice I phrase things the way he does sometimes." These shifts aren't strategic, they're automatic. The nervous system naturally synchronizes with people it feels drawn to. When a woman secretly craves you, her body and emotional rhythm begin to adapt to yours. She may match your tone, your pace of speech, or even your emotional intensity. If you're calm, she settles. If you're thoughtful, she becomes reflective. This isn't about trying to impress you. It's about emotional attunement. What makes this sign engaging is how invisible it is to the person experiencing it. Mirroring happens when someone feels safe and interested but isn't consciously choosing to express that interest. It's the brain saying, "This person feels familiar. Stay aligned." You might notice that she adopts your communication style over time. If you're direct, she becomes clearer. If you're reserved, she softens her delivery. If you're emotionally grounded, she appears more centered around you than she does with others. These shifts are rarely dramatic, but they're consistent. Psychologically, mirroring serves a purpose. It reduces emotional distance. It creates a sense of being on the same wavelength without needing to say anything out loud. When attraction is hidden, this becomes one of the safest ways for desire to express itself without crossing internal boundaries. Men often overlook this sign because it doesn't look like pursuit. There's no chase, no obvious signal. But emotional alignment is a deeper form of connection than surface-level flirting. We don't unconsciously adapt to people we don't care about. In sessions, people sometimes realize this pattern only after reflecting back. They'll notice how different they feel around one person compared to everyone else. More natural, more in sync. That feeling isn't random, it's resonance. The key is not to exaggerate or test this alignment. When mirroring is met with steadiness, it deepens naturally. When it's challenged or highlighted, it often retreats. Hidden attraction often reveals itself not through what's said, but through how two people move emotionally together. When she mirrors you without realizing it, it's a quiet sign that her system recognizes yours as meaningful. And that kind of recognition rarely happens without desire being present, even if it's carefully kept unspoken. 7. She creates distance. Right. When attraction grows. One of the most confusing signs of hidden attraction is distance that appears at the exact moment connection starts to deepen. From the outside, this looks like withdrawal, inconsistency, or loss of interest. From a psychological standpoint, it often signals the opposite. I've seen this pattern repeatedly in therapeutic conversations, especially when someone feels drawn to a person more than they expected to be. When attraction crosses an internal threshold, the nervous system reacts. Not with excitement, but with caution. Desire introduces vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens emotional control. Creating distance becomes a way to restore balance. It's not rejection, it's regulation. In sessions, people often describe this as needing space to think without being able to explain why. They'll say they felt too affected, too aware, or too emotionally engaged. That awareness can feel overwhelming, especially if the attraction wasn't planned or doesn't fit neatly into their life. You might notice that just as conversations become more meaningful, she slows communication. She becomes harder to access emotionally. She may still care, still pay attention, but she creates room. This isn't about playing games. It's about protecting herself from emotions she hasn't decided how to handle yet. Men often misinterpret this as a signal to chase harder or demand clarity, but pressure during this phase usually reinforces distance. When attraction is hidden, the mind needs time to reorganize. Distance allows her to regain a sense of control and self-definition. What's important is consistency on your end. When distance is met with calm steadiness rather than anxiety or pursuit, it often softens over time. The moment she feels that space won't be punished, attraction feels safer to hold. I've heard people admit later that pulling away was the moment they realized how much someone mattered. They didn't create distance because they felt nothing. They did it because they felt too much, too quickly. This pattern is especially common in emotionally thoughtful individuals. They don't rush into feelings, they pause, reflect, and regulate before re-engaging. Distance becomes a temporary boundary, not a permanent one. The most telling detail is this: even in distance, attention doesn't disappear. She still notices. She still remembers. She still reacts internally. That quiet continuity is the difference between disinterest and self-protection. Hidden attraction doesn't always move forward in a straight line. Sometimes it steps back to breathe, and understanding that prevents you from turning a moment of emotional caution into a permanent disconnect. Hidden attraction rarely announces itself with obvious signals. It whispers through attention, emotional shifts, subtle alignment, and even distance. A woman who secretly craves someone doesn't need to act out. Her mind and body reveal the truth quietly. Understanding these signs, emotional alertness, self-control, tracking, mood changes, testing safety, mirroring, and strategic distance, allows men to see beyond surface behavior and recognize genuine interest. The key isn't to chase or pressure, but to observe, remain grounded, and respond with calm consistency. When you learn to notice these hidden cues, you gain insight into desire that is quietly real, yet carefully controlled.